Guangzhou, China. Now to the Chinese whom I see in the audience, he needs no introduction, because in the Chinese academic world, he's become something of a household name as an outspoken educational reformer, an activist, and a thinker. Di Ganyan was born in Hangzhou City in Zhejiang Province in eastern China. During the Cultural Revolution, along with many other urban young people, he was sent to do physical labor in the countryside. This means no middle school, no high school, physical labor. Yesterday, Di Gan told me that he actually learned a lot from this, especially about how ordinary people live. After that, he studied philosophy in Heilongjiang University in the icy Northeast, and then he earned a doctorate in Western philosophy from Beijing University. He also studied philosophy at the Committee for Social Thought in Chicago, and he's been a scholar in the Center for Asian Studies at the University of Hong Kong. Among his numerous publications are books on East and West, the debate of ancients and moderns, the humanities in Chinese universities, and the philosophy of Leo Strauss. He's also the editor-in-chief of a very influential book series called Culture, China and the World. In all of this, he's been at the very forefront of a wider educational movement in China that's seeking ways to foster critical, innovative thinking in universities. Besides offering various correctives to the deficiencies of an educational system known for strong emphasis on narrow technical proficiency in practical fields, these new educational reformers are endeavoring to rethink what humanities would mean for China, especially taking into account the long tradition of humane letters in Chinese civilization and also the various Western crises of rationalism and modernity. Since 2009, Di Gan has held various and, as I gather, perhaps wrongly, simultaneous positions at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou, China. This is the major university in southern China. He's Dean of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Humanities. He's Director of the General Education Department, and above all, of special interest for us, he's the Dean of Boya College. Boya is a small elite college within Sun Yat-sen University that is designed to be a seedbed for critical thinkers and for general education. The curriculum includes the study of Chinese literature and Chinese philosophy, but also Western classics, which includes careful study of certain Western texts, but more surprisingly for us, and very audaciously, Greek and Latin. The college is a bold, unique, and therefore controversial experiment that nevertheless seems to be gaining traction in China. And Di Gan is the vision and the driving force behind it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ganyan.
Thank you, Mr. Emergence, and I wish also thank the Dean of Studies for inviting me to come to the conference to meet with so many wonderful people, all devoted to liberal education. It's a great honor to speak about liberal education in St. John's College, as St. John's College always for me the model for liberal education. So I should say a few words first about the conference. I think the conference is very great and very big deal. We do have a community of liberal education. I learned a great deal from many colleagues' papers and discussions, and I was encouraged by many of you so dedicated to liberal education. But I think the conference also called attention to the challenges and the crises facing liberal education today. When I read the conference announcement and the conference title as sent to me by Dean Sturdy, my immediate reaction is that I would rather wish we don't have to answer the question what liberal education for. I wish liberal education, the value of liberal education is self-evident without the need of any justification and defense. But unfortunately, it's obviously not the case today. As we can see from the conference announcement, that even in the United States, liberal education and liberal scholars are very much defensive of it. So I think you can imagine how difficult it would be to promote liberal education in China, which is the topic I'm supposed to speak about today. But I want to make it clear at the outset that I'm not coming here to stand for China. China is such a vast and complicated country. I don't think anyone can speak for all corners. What I can offer is only some of my personal reflections on what's going on in China's higher education today. Now, I would say liberal education is in China both very, very difficult, but also seemingly hopeful. First, about the difficulties. Now, 5 years ago, I founded the very first liberal arts college in China, named the Boya College in Chinese, which attracted wide attention, discussions, and debates. The first response to Boya College from almost all corners, from newspapers, is this: what a job these kids will have afterwards. Implying that Boya education or liberal education can only produce useless people. Or at no use, at least for the competitive world market. At that time, the only answer I can make is to say, I don't worry about that. But actually I do. As a founding dean of Boya College, I cannot just say to my students and their parents that it's your business if you can find a job or not. I really cannot say that. And I must be responsible for the future of my students. I will come back to this important issue later in my conclusion part. But I think the point is that we don't have to make liberal and professional education opposite to each other. It's not a question of either or. This is, I think, very important, at least for me, to promote liberal education. In some sense, I feel this is the issue of life and death of liberal education in China, and even in the United States, as I would think. Now, the second response to the Boya College is mainly from business leaders. And in the opening of Boya College, I made a statement of the Boya's mission. Roughly, I said that Boya's mission is to counter over-utilitarianistic approach to higher education, designed merely for competitiveness in world market. Later, I also say the ideal human beings, as admired by Boya students, is not billionaires but great thinkers. So the last sentence seems to be very much irritating to business leaders. Some of them are actually my old friends, so trying to make an appointment with me, trying to have a public debate with me. That's about the value, I think, about the value ranking, which value entirely. Liberal education or economic growth, things like that. They also want to say I greatly devalued the great contribution of millionaires to our society and even to education. I actually turned down all invitation to a public debate because I know I cannot win the battle. I believe they can easily beat me by only saying one word, and you cannot establish a college without money. So, but I in my heart always insisted that I could bring the greatest gain to liberal education is this money mentality, as so dominated in today's world. Not dangerous to China's liberal education. I think it's also true to the United States. As you all know, I read books like Saving Education from the Age of Money, things like that. So I think this would be a long debate and tension for liberal education. The third response to biology is more serious. It's more about the critical value. And some people argue that liberal education must be a kind of education too elitist to be good to the students from poor family. I probably take this challenge more seriously than anything else, because you know China is such a country with long socialist tradition, and the value of equality is deeply rooted in society at large. And of course, I personally respect equality as a value and a standard. But the best I can do is to try my best to find the students from poor background to come into work. I think this is also always a tension. We always have a tension between education quality and education equality. This is also not some issue you can solve once for all. So these are some problems and challenges we face when promoting liberal education in China. And I guess these challenges also you face also in the States. But I think the good news about China is that despite these skepticism about liberal education, more and more educators and also parents come to take liberal education very seriously. So strange thing in China is this: today we rarely find anyone who would openly argue against liberal education. It looks liberal education seems to be good for everyone. Now I would say I would think probably two factors contributing to this positive reception of liberal education in China. The first is definitely the classical Chinese idea of education, which is generally a humanistic education that's under the whole human being. This is a great tradition in China and still alive for many people. Of course, I should point out that there is a negative side with this classical Chinese idea of education, which is to say it's too much downplay and even devalue expert and occasional education. As you know, Max Weber once made a point, made a very strong case in criticizing Chinese education ideal, only caring to make gentlemen, and despite expert and occasional education, which in Max Weber's view partly explains why China did not first develop modern science and technology. Now, right or wrong, this argument is no longer important for China today, because today's China is no longer a classical, traditional China after learning from the West about more than 100 years. Today's Chinese education, the problem with China's education is too much emphasize the expert education. Almost giving no space for education for humanity. Now that's the problem. So there is a wider consensus today in China that it's time for us to revive the classical Chinese idea of education, that is to say, to honor the education for human being as a whole, not just technical and occasional and expert knowledge. The second factor contributing to the positive reception of education in China is definitely from the United States. That is the case of American liberal education, showing to Chinese education leaders that liberal education is very, very not only to China. So I do have some worry about the future of liberal education here in the States. If we witness the decline and even death of liberal education, the small liberal college, then probably China also was lacking argument for why Chinese should do liberal education. So precisely in this point, I would be very glad to say we were part in China, and St. John's College and Santa Fe have been in very good terms in recent years. And we actually, in study, and I actually just signed the official document to have collaboration between the Ware College and the St. John's College. And I would love to share with you some pictures to see how this collaboration coming by. And now, almost from the very beginning, it's quite natural that from the very beginning of Ware College, and some students in St. John's College come to visit Ware College and share their experience in St. John's College with Ware students. And then they were just getting on very well. So the point I want to make here is that the collaboration between Boyan and St. John's was not from top down, but initiated largely by students. When these students back to St. John's, then they probably talk to tutors and deans. So probably about 2 years ago, we had former dean Ms. Yura visit the Ware College. And in addition to give public talk about liberal education, she also offered to have a seminar with Ware College in the St. John's way, that is by discussion. I guess I remember it about Plato's short dialogue, Plato. So they have also had a very high evening. Then afterwards, after many correspondence between Mr. Sterling and me, we finally sent Boyer's representative early this year to St. John's College here to start the cooperation between the two colleges. Also, when she is back to China, it's difficult to handle this. And then we in Boya actually held a workshop exclusively on St. John's way of doing liberal education, which also joined by another St. John's former student who happened to visit us at that time. So the two colleges were just coming and forth, and then we signed a document called the Collaboration Agreement to establish a faculty-student exchange program between Ware College and St. John's College. And that we signed probably just last June. And so in then St. John's also sent students to Boya, and one St. John's student also participated in International Summer Program of St. Anthony University. Then later in August, we sent two Boya College students here as one-year exchange students. So this is the collaboration between Boya and St. John's. Now the point I want to make here is that both St. John's and Boya are actually very cautious in choosing the so-called international partner. You all know that today's universities are all very crazy about the so-called international cooperation. But to my knowledge, many, if not most of the collaboration has little or nothing to do with education. In most cases, more like chose partners. And I think that we have one thing in common, that we want to do things for education, particularly for undergraduate education. So my suggestion to my American colleagues is that we should not do international cooperation for the sake of international cooperation. But really we need to see whether two partners are having something in common. Now, here we have to back to the original question of what is liberal education. I think that the collaboration is working good. It should promote the further discussion of what is liberal education and how to do liberal education better in different cases, in different schools. I think this is why I choose St. John's College as well as the major partner, not others. Because I do assume that in the idea of liberal education, I probably share some basic idea with St. John's approach. So today I need to make open what is my personal idea of liberal education. I actually rarely speak openly about my personal faith in liberal education. So it's actually very simple. My own view of liberal education is largely shared by three people, all related to Chicago. I think you all know about him. He's the former president of University of Chicago. And if I mistake not, I think St. John's adoption of new curriculum in 1937 was very much related to President Hutton's original plan of curriculum for University of Chicago, which was turned down by Chicago's professors, and transferred some formation to St. John's as an Annapolis. Well, of course, it's correctly if I made a mistake. Now, this little book, High Learning in America, published in 1936, is actually can be used to describe what's going on in China's higher learning in after 2 decades. If you read this book, you know that Hutchins was discussing or attacking the American higher education at that time. The time, as we see, was total confusion, the chaos. And the small book tried to find a way out. That is what he called general education. So I was greatly influenced by Hutchins and his idea of what a university should be. The second one is Lewis Cross. I of course know he's a very controversial figure in the States. I also can tell you he is again very controversial in China as well. That's inevitable. But I do buy his general idea, particularly, as made in his great article, What is Liberal Education, in 1959. I remember the first sentence of this article is something like, liberal education is an education towards the culture. The final product of liberal education is the culture of the person, culture of the human being. I also quoted a few sentences from the article. I could not agree more with that. First of all, liberal education is a counterpoint to mass culture. That's the most to my heart. And the liberal education consists in listening to the conversation among the greatest minds. That is to say, liberal education mainly consists in reading great books. And third, liberal education is the liberation from lobbying. Now, all these things work pretty well for China today, I think. So this is why I truly buy his idea, and I also take this as my idea of liberal education. The third one is even more controversial, because Alan Bloom and his books American mind. I had chance to read the Plato and Aristotle with him in early 1990, shortly before his death. And I will not say I would agree with everything he said, but I do think the thing they concern the most is education. And I also think this book is important in that it tells us sometimes, self-claiming openness probably just closeness. So the issue is open to what? Open to great books, or open to media, open to mass culture. That is the issue. So at least in this point, I also very much like Bruce's ideas. And also, I would say I always recommend this book for my students in China. Not only to learn something, what was once going on in the United States, but also to see how true of China today also, as here in many description of what the students are, what the university should be, things like that. Now, so I think you all know I'm a conservative by American standard. I actually consider liberal education is by nature a kind of conservative enterprises because we want to conserve something great, something conserve great books rather than pull them down or trash them. I think definitely you have some mind of trying to conserve something rather than put down something, and you can do liberal education. Otherwise, you are not in mind to do liberal education. This is my idea. So when I was in Chicago in the 1990s, I often dreamed of one day probably I could establish a liberal arts college in China. But of course, I know that it's a daydream. I never thought it could be possible to have it realized. After leaving Chicago, the first job I got actually was not in mainland China, but in Hong Kong. I was offered a job by University of Hong Kong. I was first very excited, and I thought Hong Kong may be a very ideal place to do liberal education. But I was so disappointed to find out that it's no way to do liberal education in Hong Kong. I still remember vividly the hosting dinner, welcome dinner to me by some Chicago alumni in the first week I arrived in Hong Kong, because they were also Chicago alumni, and of course knew very well about Chicago's general education for undergraduate students. So I talked to them about liberal education and the possibility to do liberal education in Hong Kong, because at that time they were already in higher position. One of them was then Dean of Business School. But I was so surprised to find that he told me that liberal education is very, very costly. We Hong Kong cannot afford that. I was so shocked. I said, Hong Kong is so rich. I think Hong Kong is even richer than the United States. Why you cannot do that? And also you're already in the position. He said, no, we are not the state. We are only a city. We cannot afford that. Anyway, and I just learned that no way to do liberal education in Hong Kong. So I was very disappointed. By that time that I was working in the Hong Kong, I also watched through mainland China, and I was feeling even worse because at that time, that means around the year 2000, a Chinese university was crazy about something called world-class university. Things like, I don't know what that means is St. John's College, a world-class college. I think yes, but they probably won't think so. Anyway, the more they talk about world-class university as the goal of China's university, the more I feel disappointed and defeated. Because I can see no hope, no way to realize my dream. But when the time I'm often, although I work in Hong Kong University, I often go back to China for teaching and for conference and for talking with many of my old friends. And probably many of them are already president or vice president or dean or director of universities, all in some positions. Then I find not only me, many professors share with me about my disappointment with China's higher education. Now here I have to give you some sense of China's higher education, putting in historical context, so we can see why we would do things like that. Now I started from 1952 because China's higher education is largely located in that year's reconstruction. And all universities are reorganized. I call education for industrialization. University was basically a model in student model, and particularly emphasizing specialist science technology. So most universities become polytechnic institutes with no humanities. Now I will not say this is all bad, and there is something good about this education system. At least first of all, the idea of science and technology is highly appreciated and valued in China. And my father is a professor of science, so I always respect the science. I have no problem with science, as many humanities professors do. But the problem also clear that the university is just not a whole, just a half university, without humanities. So this is the basic structure for China's universities. Then I guess all you know that China had one crazy 10 years, all universities closed down, and that's called the Cultural Revolution. So China's university was restarted from 1977. So I called that education for reform and openness. And during that time, also we see the formation of national requirement, that is the public courses, which also not called general education, but actually it was China's official or national requirement of GP. You can see very clearly what's the focus now: English, math, and computing, plus reform ideology courses. I would say something good about the reform ideology courses. It did serve as some critical function to criticize reform ideology, at least. But this is the up to late 1990s. Chinese university is like this. That besides professional courses, all students are required to take these courses. College English, that take a long time, and 12 credits. In comparison, college Chinese only require 2 credits. So very much emphasis on English, which is of course corresponding to opening up policy. But it's not important. I just say, I want to, quickly give you some picture for us, we are in the Harvard and the this point, largely by 1999, then some considered leaders of polytechnic universities began to worry about the cultural quality of particularly students of science, because they feel their PhD students in science and technology don't know even very, very little anything of the humanities. They probably never read any poems, any novels, any philosophical works. So these older generation began to worry about that. So they became, because they were powerful figures, they were presidents of top universities, they began to promote what they call cultural quality education. But even so, it's still very marginalized in China's universities. And then I would take the year 2005 as very important, and that year I was supported by Hong Kong's foundation, actually Japanese foundation, to launch a very big conference, 3 days conference in Beijing, and attended by 200 professors from all top Chinese universities. The important thing about the conference that we professors began to reach some consensus, which is that, first of all, we have to reverse all the utilitarian approaches of higher education, as I said before. The second is to re-stress classroom education that emphasizes the value of broader learning and the humanistic education that honors the whole human being. Now that's important because all these professors, some important professors. So when we get together to give a public voice, and it does make some momentum to societies. So after that, I also was supported by Hong Kong Foundation. I began to run annual National Summer School of General Education. For this summer school, we generally only do 2 things. One is to show and practice the close reading of great books. The second is to organize the students into small group discussion. So that's the 2 things we mainly focus on. And then every year we do that. And last year I did not do that. I was very exhausted. And but the summer school, this national summer school, had a great impact on many universities, because each year the top universities will send their administrative persons and professors to the summer school to see how to do education, particularly close reading of great books and small group discussion. That is what we have been doing before I founded the Ware College. So around probably year 2005 to 2007, I would say most of the Chinese top universities come to take the strategy. I call it 2-tier system of strategy. That is, the first level is to do general education to give courses covering all university students. You have to have some sense China is a country with many population. So the university is also very populated. Like at Shenzhen University, we will have 8,000 students every year. So it's a very big task to have so many courses, covering all students. So that is the first level. Then the second level, second tier is these best universities would to try to found and establish some small college or school, like Beijing University, Fudan University, and Ware College in Shenzhen University. That is what we have been doing for these years. And so take the Shenzhen University as a case. I'm not only the responsible for designing and organizing all courses every term for all students. Basically meaning 2-year students, 16,000 students. It's a very difficult job because we may not have that much teachers to teach courses. But fortunately, and these best universities also begin to try something more special to see whether more purely liberal education can be tried in China. So I want to make a distinction in my personal way that general education and liberal education in China, for me, mean different things. General education for me meaning the courses for all students of the university. But liberal education only for small cards, because otherwise we cannot do that liberal education for that vast number of students. Not only we simply don't have that many teachers, it's also very difficult to organize into small class. So that's what we are having to read. Sorry. Now I would just show what kind of general education for university students. Now this is the new general education curriculum I designed for Stanford University, and basically this is different from my view of liberal education, because for most students, I think the emphasis I would put on, say, environmental sciences, life sciences, and science of space, including geography and city planning, and all these things, I think daily facing Chinese students in the future and present. So yet they have to know more about the global stuff and also about the Chinese language. But that is a very simple design for general education. And this is just the GE courses at for university. Now for Goya College, what I want to do is quite different. I do want to fully take vertical approaches. And then, of course, the challenge for us in China is that we have to take a vertical books of both China and the West. So that is what we have been working on. And while the motto, as we put, is integrating ancients and moderns, at East and the West. This is of course easy to say, but very hard to do. And we are still in the beginning, and I really hope to discuss with your colleagues about all these things. Then in curriculum, we basically first of all is the books of both East and West. Then the classical languages are required, particularly Greek, or Latin, or classical Chinese, for 3 semesters. At the beginning, I was a little bit ambitious to require all students to study both Greek and Latin. And actually, I so realized that's simply impossible in so short time. So I like to change the requirement to say you just choose one of them. And then you can take another SU selective courses in senior years. Focus on one of them. And then classical studies goes to East and West. Then in the junior and senior years, we will add modern humanities and social sciences. And the whole teaching is generally organized into small class discussion. So biology only take 30 students a year. And I don't want to have more because otherwise I cannot handle it. And so I think the difficult thing for us is how to organize the course. Now, in addition to survey courses, covering a number of great books, and we often do is to devote one semester for a single book for some very important classes. Now, these are very basic fundamental Chinese classics, Zhuozhuan and Sijing, and also the 4 books meaning the 4 Confucian fundamental books. And also Homer and Plato and Aristotle. So the basic thing we want to do is to take Chinese and Western great books in equal weight. But it is very difficult for me to arrange all courses. So I actually often think that 4 years is too short. We should have 6 for. Now this is what I personally do, and also actually I was joined by many colleagues in China. Basically, I would say today, in today's China, great book approaches are actually widely accepted and practiced, particularly in top universities. All young generation of teachers and professors are doing in this way. So this is a great change of China's, I would call the basic teaching method. And we do see the very good effect. Not just using some, I should not say bullshit, but really a lot of things, awful things, as Chinese students used to read. I don't really know why they read that stuff. They're written by very modern living guys, and I prefer my students to read the dead person first. That's Now I would say that after 5 years, we already had the first and actually 2 graduation classes. Today, Boya College actually enjoyed a high reputation in China. And nobody would ask the same question as whether the students got a job or not, because we all got jobs. This is the first first graduating class, graduated in last year, and 2013. And 32 people, and 27 generally speaking, they go to graduate school. And from very different fields, from psychology and social science, political science, and law, of course, to all fields of humanities. Then also the other 5 people also got their job. They teaching English, and they are editors for academic press, and one of them working for American NGO active in China and things like that. So I think the important thing is that, as I said before, we should not make general liberal education and professional education opposite to each other. And we must make some natural transformation from liberal education to professional studies. Afterwards, they have to, working in some field with their broad background of human knowledge and with their moral awareness. I think this is the way we should do. Otherwise, if the first people of first class all find no job, definitely the college will be dead, and that's very clear to me. So with this success, I actually already found the second college in Chongqing University, which is also a top university in China's southwest of China. And so this is in the year 2013, I had the first class graduated in biology in Guangzhou, and also I opened the second biology in Chongqing. So this probably tells that the future of biology and bioeducation at least seen by promising by many Chinese educators. Otherwise, they would not agree to let me to found another college, because in China we are not doing totally independent college. We must establish a college within the university and supported by all resources of the university. That would be much easier to. Otherwise, it would be very, very difficult to launch a whole new college. That would need a lot of resources. Then still, that and in that picture. Yeah, this one. Now this year I also burden myself to take another job, acting as part-time dean of Xinya Residential College at Tsinghua University, which is China's top one polytechnical institute. So this program and this college is very different from Huaya College, because all these students are students of sciences. My concern is to promote humanistic education for Chinese students of science and technology. This actually is my very great concern, because these future scientists will be, they are, whatever they will be responsible for our future life. I don't know whether they have some basic moral sense of what human beings are. So as I tell you before, that in most of China's polytechnical universities, for a long time they don't have any humanities department. For a long time, students have never been taught about any subjects and topics in humanities. So now this is what I'm doing this year, and because of the high status of Tsinghua University, so this Xinya College is very soon attracting a lot of attentions. Because of its status, it will be followed by many, many other polytechnic universities. So in conclusion, I say in the future, I would say what we try to do, or what I see as the future of liberal education. In China, I basically see we should do two things. One is to promote the humanistic general education for all students, and particularly for students of science and technology. I actually see this as my mission, and I believe I probably still have 10 years to live, and I will work on that. Then the second is toward comparative classes as the core of liberal education. Now this is also what I wish to discuss with my colleagues in the States. I actually discussed with Ms. Mora about this issue. I fully agree with St. John's cautious belief. That is, as Mora was saying to me, St. John's College was also considering and discussing about whether in St. John's liberal courses, adding some classes of East of China or something. And but there is a very serious concern about the time. We don't have that much time to do that much things. So I think it's wise not to do too quickly to add some new courses. In China, we are so different because Chinese, learn from the West for more than 100 years. It's easy for Chinese to read English, the American students to read Chinese. So it's still possible for Chinese students to work on two fields. So as I insisted them, whatever you do in the future, at least as a Goya student, you have to learn either Greek or Latin, in addition to classical Chinese. And you have to know something about antiquity of both China and the West. I personally believe that comparative classics, particularly comparative studies of Chinese and Greek thoughts and traditions, would be a very promising field for academic work. There is a lot of things to do, and it's still in the beginning. And as I know, there is a few American professors and young scholars moving to this direction. So far, we, both in China and America, we basically lack people who fully master both ancient Greek and classical Chinese. And Goya College, actually, I'm going to do this. We try to make our students as the first generation of capable to do this kind of job. Thank you all.
So we have time for a few questions for the floor.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can tell us more about how this culture of the human being and honoring the whole human being and the work you're doing to cultivate more of an awareness of the moral sense of what a human being is. Can you tell us more about the kinds of conflicts you've experienced with the collectivism of Confucian and Marxist China?
So you mean about the classical Chinese view or about today's?
I'm more interested in, I guess, the conflicts that you might feel you run into with the state.
Okay, I see. I think the conflict does exist, and classical Chinese education inevitably include a kind of hierarchy of people in moral learning, not in that as simple human beings. That's not Confucius' way of seeing things. But they do see human beings are different in moral growing, the degree of moral growing. And so all Confucian teaching is to see, of course there are lots of different schools, in what way human beings can elevate to the highest level of human being. In Chinese they're called Sen, something with no flaw. Of course it's ideal. But today, of course, the modern China people, the main concern is first about equality. Particularly equality of education is a big issue for Chinese. I don't think we have a very simple way to solve this question. But I also don't think that issue is so big that we can do nothing. Basically, even in the tradition of China, there is a long tradition that wives and family have a duty to help, children from poor family to get education. That's the kind of Confucian duty, particularly for working class and poor families.
It's pretty well known, I think, that college freshmen at St. John's frustrate each other.
Sorry, I cannot hear you.
I said that college freshmen at St. John's frustrate each other in their first experiences with discussion classes. This is a sort of just easy question, I guess. Do you have an impression whether that phenomenon is more or less among Chinese students?
Actually, I did not hear.
Yeah, how do Chinese students respond to discussion classes? Because,
I see.
Yeah, that's the basic question, right?
Yes.
This is a very, very interesting question. And, I said I read the national summer school every year. So from the very beginning, I found the very interesting difference between the Chinese and American students. In general, from my personal experience with the American students are always very active to talk. Whatever they know and don't know, understand or not, they don't care. They just talk. Chinese students are more reserved. And I think there is a sense of, they just don't want to say anything wrong. So I think there is something about faith or something like that, because Chinese students are more reserved, more difficult to get them into talk. Unless they think they do have some idea, I have a point here. Otherwise they will keep silence. So it takes time, to get them familiar with discussion. So we as teachers often, you actually use the American example to tell Chinese students that this is not the question of wrong or right, but the question is to learn from each other. Yeah, I can tell you a story. I was lessoned by my teacher in Chicago by Edward Shields, and he said, you are a typical Chinese literati, and you would be very reserved if you don't think you can make a real point. So, we Americans just talk, so you should also just talk with them, whatever. It doesn't matter if you're all wrong, and you can learn from others and to get something right. Yeah, so it's a good question. I think it's still in the process, and for Chinese students to learn how to discuss. But I also probably would make a point here, after so many years of trying to organize a discussion, I think probably there is some national difference in national character. Probably you don't have to force Chinese people so much, force them to speak. So if they prefer to keep silent, then okay, keep silent. I do think this way, but I actually this is something I would like to discuss with you about whether it is the best way always to discuss. Sometimes not, because interaction work really need working alone. Some people they don't think I do, some not only students but also my generation of scholars. They don't like to discuss. They just don't want to, working and thinking alone, and they prefer to write it. If he thinks you are like person to talk about something, otherwise they never speak in any discussion. They don't think that they can get anything from discussion. So I think this we also should allow some people doing this way.
Right, well.
Yeah, sort of as a correlative question, we have a lot of emphasis here at St. John's on developing the skill of listening in addition to speaking, which is not necessarily the same thing as just being quiet, right? Could you speak to that as well? The quality of your team's capacity to listen.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I think also, I was always amazed by St. John's way of discussing. I knew this from very early on, from my time of Chicago, and at that time I probably know more about St. John's at Annapolis, and I still think, actually, as I told you before, we held a workshop on St. John's way of doing liberal education. And we mainly two things. One is teacher and the students is in process of co-learning. And the other is all by discussion. I will tell you, and my teachers were really shocked by this. They think they cannot do this. And also I cannot ask them to do this because I believe there must be a condition for tutors to do that. That is, they are not required to publish. Because this is not, whereas still teachers are also highly demanded on teaching. Because we ask them to spend a lot of time with students after teaching. So they are also, they have to listen to whatever students, talk to, only if students like. Sometimes, some kind of bullshit lesson. So they do have a very close relationships. And for the listening, I think this also depends. Many people, I don't generally in one college, when students are good listeners to what people say. But also, I find some students who looks closing himself off from others. And sometimes I don't know whether this is just the problem of this period, not for all time, or sometimes he just this kind of person. I do want to tell you that it's a problem with Chinese kids now because they are, the one child family. So they are very, they don't, at the beginning, they don't really know how to communicate with each other. Two things, not only one child, the other thing is the computer. They like to talk to computer. So even for students, living in one room, it's not like us. They go, hey, what's the thing? They will send a message to them. Not talking. That's very scary to me. Yeah, this is, I think this is a generation question, and we're still working on it. Yeah, but so far it's not a very big problem for Boya, I think.
I have a question. Like St. John's, the tutors are sometimes demand to do something that they don't know. For example, the tutor who is majoring in literature, the college is demanding this tutor to study science and to teach on science. But what's your opinion on that? And then, is it possible that in China that we can do that too?
No, this is the way I personally really love, and I do wish to do it, but I think at least for now it's really impossible. Because all teachers, in today's university, not only in China but also across the whole world, many university teachers never see themselves as a teacher. They think they are doing research. They don't have to teach. So this is a problem, and with very high pressure on publication, you actually have no way to ask them to, give all time to teaching. Now that way of teaching means that a teacher always learning new things, always put yourself in a learner position. Now that's very good, and the person really love it. But not only in China, even in the United States, St. John's is just too unique to be imitated by anyone. I know only St. John's, no second one. Not doing this thing like that. No, not China, even in the United States, not possible, not possible. It's not a question of good or bad, it's not possible.
We have time for one more question. Sir.
In your opening remarks, you expressed some concern about the future of liberal education in the United States because you feared that if it was lost here, that in China there would be no incentive to experiment and try to expand liberal education in China itself. I found that very interesting because I think it gets to a point that I've heard debated over the last 2 days here, which is the intrinsic versus the extrinsic value of liberal education. Is it enough to say that a liberal education gives meaning to the individual's life, or do we have to connect it to civic education or education for a larger social good? And my question to you is, in China, is it possible to imagine a liberal education that is fundamentally intrinsic in value for the good of the individual, or does your comment earlier suggest that this experiment will succeed or fail depending on whether liberal education can demonstrate its extrinsic value to society as a whole?
Actually, I do believe that Chinese also will take that intrinsic. I forget to tell one thing that there is an interesting thing about China's leaders in higher education. Just not very long ago, China's educational leaders, particularly the university presidents, they knew many more about America's top universities, like Harvard, Yale, Chicago. They also knew very little, almost nothing about the liberal arts college. I can give you an example. Yesterday or day before yesterday, we heard about Professor Banco talking about something. Now his book on college now has a Chinese translation, which is a very bad translation, I'm sorry to say. Because the translator did not know, doesn't have any knowledge about the difference between college and the university. So from the very beginning, he simply translated the book name, college, as university. So in chapters and pages, when the Banco actually talking about the difference between college and university, then if you read the Chinese version, you simply don't know which is which. So I just give an example to say, the Chinese people are very insensitive to this difference between college and the university. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I do see a kind of sign that quite many university presidents come to me. I would say I often see as a kind of authority in higher education. They will come to me to discuss with me about things. I was very surprised that many of them actually came to me asking about liberal arts college. And they want to do college. Now, I just gave a case of Xinyang College, residential college in Tsinghua University. I said, which is the top #1 China's university. The president really have an idea of spending 10 years to make a whole Tsinghua University into a college systems. And the idea behind that is his concern about education, particularly for undergraduates. So more and more Chinese leaders in higher education come to talk about the education of the soul, and to refuse to see education as only a kind of expert education, a useful people. I think this really happens in the last 3 or 5 years. Of course, it will take a long time for them to get the real system down. That takes time. But at least in my idea, many new presidents of Chinese top university are changing their ideas. And they're giving much more attention to education, rather than these innovation of things like that. So I would answer you this way. I do believe, and I do believe the value of liberal education is rooted in the heart. Actually, I can find, for the first students coming to my college, I actually often can see a kind of self-debating with themselves, with their parents. On one hand, the parents want their children to make money, and also you understand they wish their children to make better life than they need money. But on the other hand, they also think this kind of education is not real education, lacking something. And hope the children should be taught about something more fundamental and more concerning whether these kids, to become what kind of person. Whether a good person, bad person, right? But the parents don't concern about that. So, often, they're coming to my college as result of this family debating. Sometimes even, father is on one side and mother is on the other side. So I think this is something, rooted in human heart. It's not just a few of us so crazy about this stuff because we are, training humanity. It's not. And I don't believe human nature requires every education. Thank you.
Sorry.